Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. You can see I have a little screen up there that says welcome to our Atheists of Florida meeting, and all opinions expressed, political or otherwise, are those of the attendee and not the organization. Our guest today is Jim Peterson from the Tampa Bay Post-Carbon Council, and his topic is climate, whether you like it or not. As a refresher for some and new information for others, I want to briefly go over how to raise your hand in Zoom. If you open the participants window at the bottom of the screen on your PC or Mac, you should see a little box with a blue hand in it. You click that, and the host will see it and recognize you. Mr. Peterson has asked that we hold questions until the end of his presentation, which will take about 15 minutes. There are some shortcuts on the screen for those who have Windows or Mac to make it a little easier, a little faster for you to raise or lower your hand. Our guest next week will be Sarah Henry from the Child Friendly Faith Project. And their goal is to have a world in which no child suffers abuse or neglect as a result of religious belief, doctrine, or practice. As we well know, as the anti-vaccinators and the faith healing people, many children have suffered because of their views. Before he begins his presentation, I want to start with a short clip, even though I mistyped there, which will explain how to solve global warming, which will actually negate the need for his talk. However, he said he wants to do it anyway.
Lucky for you.
I have him already.
Well, I feel have the honor to be in the spotlight. After that presentation, as Judy mentioned, I don't know if this is kind of repetitive, I think, but we'll go ahead and try it anyway and see what happens. I have a little presentation here to share, maybe, if I can get it to cooperate. Hold on a moment.
That worked for you earlier today.
Yes, it did. Let me get this. All right, can everybody see this?
No.
No, no one can see it.
No one can see it.
Okay,
Did you share your screen?
Yeah, hold on. I'm getting there. Let's see, here we are.
Okay, now you should be able to share your screen. Sorry, I had not changed it.
We see it now.
Yeah.
Okay, there we are. All right, so we're hopefully ready to go. And so today's topic is climate change. And as you know, climate change is inevitable because we've always had climate change. It really isn't anything new. What is new is the extent to which the climate is changing, and the question as to whether or not that climate is going to be friendly to human hopes and ambitions. So this, as Judy mentioned, is a presentation of the Tampa Bay Post-Carbon Council. And so we'll go from there, hopefully. Hopefully. I'm clicking on it. Let's try this. No, that's not working either. I guess I gotta go here.
Well, you're not playing. I don't think you're playing. You have to click on the from beginning. There you go.
Yes.
And Karen is asking you to speak up.
Speak up. Okay. Now what? Oh, there we are. Now, can everyone still see me? See the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, now let's try it. Oh, smooth. All right. So, what is climate change? The problem on a graph. Oh, come on, get out of there, you silly thing. All right. Oh, how do I go back? Oh, I'm going too far forward here. You'll have to forgive me. This is my first come back here. Microphone speaker.
Jim, once you're in presentation mode, you often can use the arrow keys, the up and down.
Right.
That's what I've just found out.
There you go.
Maybe.
Maybe.
All right, here we are.
Yes, there you are.
All right, now let's do it maybe the right way. People often use the term climate change and global warming to describe the same phenomenon, an increase in average global temperatures caused by humans adding heat-trapping greenhouse gases into our planet's atmosphere. While some places are getting warmer as a result, other parts of the world might sometimes be cooler. And ocean or atmospheric temperatures are not the only things changing. Weather patterns and sea levels are too. Some people, therefore, prefer to use the term climate change, as it covers the full range of predicted impacts. Climate change is another term you might also hear. But the one I prefer to use, and I think describes the situation more accurately, is the phrase, the crisis of the natural world. There is a good deal more at stake here than just the fluctuation of air temperature by a few degrees. But the reason for that change is depicted here in the graph. The blue line that you see is the surface temperature, the average surface temperature of the Earth. And it is superimposed on by the red line, which indicates the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide. And as you know, while correlation is not causation, the red line precedes the blue line. So it's strongly suggestive, especially in view of the rather small time period in which the biggest change has taken place, from about 1850 to the present time. It is something that it's called the hockey stick curve for obvious reasons, because if you look at it at a 45-degree angle, it looks sort of like a hockey stick. And it's commonly referred to as that. Let's try it. We live in a delicate world of life, and everything is perched on a very narrow basis of circumstances, temperature being just one of them. As many of you already know, we face a multiple set of critical situations, among which are such matters as the topsoil, the oceans, insects, mammals and birds, minerals, ice, forests, solar and cosmic radiation, pollution, water, phytoplankton, and more. In most of these matters, our role as producers and consumers have had a significant impact in shaping the condition of this, the anthropic age. It's called the anthropic age because geologists and paleontologists, among others, have decided that the force that is exercising the greatest impact on our planet right now is, in fact, the human, our own species. So what evidence is there for climate change? This is hotly disputed in many areas. Temperature records show that our planet average surface temperatures has risen from about 1 degree centigrade, risen by about 1 degree centigrade since 1850. Most of this warming has taken place in the past 35 years, and the 5 warmest years on record have all occurred since 2015. By coincidence, 5 years. This could be rather alarming. The Swedish scientist and Nobel laureate Svante Arrhenius published work as early as 1896 that predicted the possibility of a runaway greenhouse effect as a consequence of the coal effluent of the Industrial Revolution of that time. He was aware of the exquisitely delicate balance in the interplay of water and gases in the atmosphere that makes life possible. There is a growing body of evidence for rising temperatures and their effects. Thus, the introduction of additional carbon dioxide from Earth's past in the form of coal, oil, and gas has a destabilizing effect on the climate system. For this conjecture, he is arguably the father of climate change science. And since his initial paper on the subject, there have been numerous publications published throughout the 20th century and becoming more numerous as time goes on, right up until the present era, when so much of the activity of climate science revolves on this question particularly. The warmer ocean and melting ice. As ocean water warms, it expands, causing global ice levels to inch higher. A 2018 study shows that sea levels have risen by an average of 7 centimeters, about 2 3/4 degrees, 2 3/4 inches rather, over the previous 25 years. Around 40% of this was due to the thermal expansion, with the rest due to melting ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland, and also melting terrestrial glaciers. The Greenland ice sheet, for example, lost an average of 280 billion tons of ice per year between 2002 and 2016. And there's no reason to believe, and every reason to concede that that trend has continued and probably even accelerated. There we go. Although extreme weather events are also on the rise, it's difficult to trace any one event back to climate change because the climate is such a varied phenomenon. But places around the world are seeing a marked increase in the frequency and severity of droughts, floods, wildfires, and tropical cyclones. Are we to blame? The overwhelming scientific consensus is that human society is responsible for climate change. In fact, a 2019 analysis of over 11,500 peer-reviewed articles on the topic found a consensus of 100% among the scientists who did the review. By burning oil, coal, and natural gas to heat our homes, power our cars, and generate electricity, we have released huge amounts of carbon dioxide and water vapor and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. These in turn trap heat in the upper levels of our planet's atmosphere, amplifying the greenhouse effect. Now, the most extreme example that you can find of the greenhouse effect is pretty close by. It's called the planet Venus. And Venus has surface temperatures of 900 degrees. It has been that way for billions of years, and it is reflective of a runaway greenhouse, which means that there was no chance for heat to escape because of the vapor layer of water, both water vapor and carbon dioxide in the upper Venusian atmosphere. And it's a real hellscape. The Soviet Union sent a satellite to investigate the surface of Venus. It lasted about 15 minutes before it melted down. The greenhouse effect, however, itself occurs naturally and is a necessary condition for life. Gas levels and global temperatures do change over time, but the current rates of change are alarming scientists. In its fifth assessment report, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, wrote that, quote, concentrations of the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide are, unquote, unprecedented in at least the last 800,000 years. Many of the corresponding changes to our climate system are unprecedented over decades to millennia. Just how bad will it get? Left unchecked, climate change will have devastating consequences for our planet and its inhabitants. Now, the important thing to note here is left unchecked. If emissions continue to rise, the IPCC estimates that we could be on track for 3 degrees Celsius of warming over the course of this century, possibly even 4 degrees centigrade in a worst-case scenario. Many scientists consider 2 or even 1.5 degrees to be the target to aim for to avoid the worst consequences. Again, this can be a runaway effect, and once started, if it goes over the 1.5 or 2 degrees or more, it becomes increasingly difficult to stop it. As our atmosphere and oceans continue to warm, the increased amount of heat will create more tropical storms and cyclones. Sea levels will continue to rise, possibly by as much as 1 meter, about 3 feet, making some coastal regions uninhabitable. There will be changes in rainfall patterns. Some areas will experience more flooding, others more drought. The drying of soil introduces the problem of ever-spreading desertification to formerly agricultural areas. And right now, this is occurring to an extreme degree in East Africa, in places like Ethiopia, and in Brazil, where a lot of the topsoil in the Amazon basin is being exposed to the sun by cutting down the trees that cover it. And once they're down, it's really hard to replant forests. The topsoil is actually very thin there, so it's very difficult to regrow the kind of tropical vegetation that was destroyed in the interest of short-term and temporary farming, especially cattle ranching. Plant and animal species will be driven to extinction as their habitats shrink or their food supply dwindles, while increased carbon dioxide levels will make the ocean more acidic, harming marine life and especially coral reefs, many of which have been severely damaged already. And something like 70% or more of the world's coral reefs have been so severely damaged that there are doubts they will recover anytime soon. And the worst thing of all, dogs and cats may be forced to cohabit. Dogs and cats living together? No? Okay. So we have to consider the fate of our fellow travelers. While some animals may migrate north to cooler climes, trees and plants generally cannot join the trek. Those trees are very slow. Insects can become destructive invasive species as they too escape tropical heat. The pace of warming is expected to pick up over time because of tipping points that produce self-reinforcing mechanisms known as climate feedbacks. For example, melting permafrost in the Arctic and Siberia releases methane, the kind of thing that's been locked away for millennia, and that fuels even more warming. What can we do about it? Well, this idyllic scene suggests one thing we might want to try. Tackling climate change will require cooperation on a global scale, bringing together governments, businesses, and individuals. We will need to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels and switch to renewable energy sources and sustainable transport options. Currently, there are several new cargo ships that employ sails to capture available wind energy to make them more efficient. Canals are another old-tech solution to moving things around. We will also need to change the way we consume by making more sustainable choices or simply buying less. Another thing, I should have mentioned this, is railroads. Railroads are much more efficient than individual trucks, diesel engine powered trucks, or even electric trucks for that matter. Although electrics would certainly be a better choice than diesel for obvious reasons. We can expect massive changes in the future. You see before you a suggested future farm, a farm consisting of interior levels where crops are grown on an industrial scale, utilizing artificial lighting and water and so forth. So that's one example of the kinds of things we may see more of, and in fact, that presently exist. There are several of these around the world, most of them in China at this point. But new technologies, be it super efficient solar panels or electric cars, will play a vital role in reducing emissions. But they are not the silver bullet in proposed methods to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and have not yet been tested on a large scale. Nonetheless, our efforts are beginning to pay off as greenhouse gas emissions are slowing in some parts of the world. In the United Kingdom, for example, emissions have fallen by 29% over the past decade, and national leaders the world over, except for you-know-who, of course, have pledged to work together to limit global temperature increases, signing the Paris Agreement in 2016. But experts agree that the changes are not happening fast enough. To ensure the future of our planet, we are going to need to ramp up our efforts. Finally, well, at least in terms of my presentation here, there are still enormous questions to be answered, facts to be gathered, and criticisms to be considered. Science is always changing, as the world is always changing. For all friends of our species, the central idea is the survival, prosperity, and happiness of our species. I cannot possibly deal with all the vast array of technical and scientific issues that have been raised in what I've just shown you. However, all reasonable questions are capable of being answered and reconciled, if not now, eventually. The future holds more interesting problems in store for us than we can possibly anticipate. And that concludes my presentation. Oops.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
I am going to cancel Spotlight View, and we will open it up to discussion. There were several things that came up in the comments when we were talking. And Vince, I would like for you to talk about can you hear me, Vince?
Can you hear me okay?
Can now, yes.
Okay. My idea was this. Right now, we're all aware that's happening, and we can't do anything about it because the people who have the money and the control won't let us do it. An example of what I mean is that years ago, we used to be #1 on public transportation in this country. We used to be. Then all these streetcars, all these things were bought by the automobile industry and destroyed. They have the money, they have the clout. They do not want, public transportation is an example of how it would be. But I'm pretty sure that nobody here in this room is going to give up their car or their vehicle. I have a, yeah. So the solution I'm saying to you is we need to start forming cooperatives where we have the food grown on the premises, we have it prepared on the premises, we have everything made on premises, one small town. That's the only way it's going to happen. We can't do it any other way.
Yes, that's certainly true. What you're referring to in terms of what happened with public transportation was exemplified in Los Angeles in the 1930s and 40s when General Motors bought up the bus system and the subway system, both of which Los Angeles had, and they worked quite well and quite efficiently. However, it suited GM to promote the use of automobiles. And as we all know, Los Angeles is virtually associated with a whole lot of smog, particularly in the 60s and 70s. That has receded somewhat, but still, you're right. That's how that's the interest of the oil companies were a paramount influence over how we move ourselves around on the planet.
Neil, you had some ideas you brought up in the chat. Would you like to talk about your ideas?
I want to make a few observations. We, and myself included, we spend too much time talking about the problem. A lot of gray hair here.
Yes.
Problem. Okay? So I think it's better to really focus on solutions. And solutions to me means that things that are practical we can do now. And if we can do them now, our children can do them. And so that, in my opinion, is what should happen. One way to do that is to first list solutions that are practical. You could call it a manifesto, whatever. And we have an election. No one seems to be asking our politicians what they're going to do. It's a free ride for them. They're not pressed. You know what I mean? They're not really pressed to say, hey, what can we do? Let's cut to the chase and ask them straight away, like I said, if we all agree this is happening, then what are we going to do? You're in a position to do something. We elect you, you go to Washington, you go to Tallahassee, you go to your county commissioners, you go to your city council, do something. But we also should take on responsibility, giving them the manifesto, not in general terms, but in specific terms. Let them select from our list of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would ask Gary if he'd like to talk about his counter view, and then I'll go to the hands.
I don't know that I have anything really substantive to offer. I've just always been of the opinion that I'm not necessarily arguing that the science is somehow wrong. I've always felt or still feel as though that the extent to which a crisis is created is overstated.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. It's very brave of you in a room full of people who disagree with that view, I guess.
I would like to say this to that point. If they publish the temperature every day and how much it rained and all that stuff, that's fine. That's good. We're used to it. But they're not publishing how much the water's risen, even if it's 1/4 of an inch, because if they keep adding 1/4 of an inch in our newspaper, the Tampa Bay Times, or once a month or whatever, our weather report is saying, hey, guess what? We just went up another 1/2 inch in water, that the level. People become aware of that. And it's factual. It's not, gee whiz, it's factual. So if you print it in the newspaper, every day we have all that statistics and temperatures all over the country and blah, blah, blah. But we're not publishing things that really would resonate. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Karen, I'm going to unmute you. You have your hand up. So if I can get this to work. I can't get it to unmute you. If you can unmute you, there you are.
Unmuted. I'm unmuted now. Okay, I will
There
also
we are.
lower my hand. Where to start? I think I'd like to say that I think we saw during the lockdown a couple of months ago what actually can happen if there's less driving, if there's less industry going on, if there's less work happening. I mean, you can look at all the pictures of seeing things like downtown Los Angeles for the first time, of seeing Table Rock in Cape Town for the first time, of seeing all sorts of things. I think that during lockdown worldwide, we saw evidence that the slowing down of the industry, the cars not driving to work every day, definitely has an influence on the environment. And those are things we saw ourselves. As far as public transportation goes, as many of you know, I lived in Europe for over 40 years, and we had no car for 5 years. We had two, then we sold them both. We used nothing but public transportation. Most of the kids don't even have a driver's license. My son, who's 23, doesn't either, because he's like, I don't need one. I use public transportation. If it's available, and you'll find if you look at the statistics of New Yorkers, most New Yorkers don't own a car. There's some that do, but the percentage is much lower because they use other forms of public transportation. Those are just my comments on that. I myself installed solar in January when I bought my house. I see every month on my solar report the amount of energy I produce. If I could feed this energy the way it's done all over the rest of the world into the system, and all the people who use solar could feed it into the system, there would be much less of need for using fossil fuel to create energy, but it's not the basis of what people want to do politically. And my last remark is, I think that the first thing the politicians need to do is to get us back, if the government changes, to get us back where we were, back into the convention, take back all the horrible things that have happened, whether it's the protection of natural parks and resources and all those other things. We've gone so backwards in the last years, it's terrible. And that for really upsets me. And I disagree with Vince to the point that on the Democratic ticket, there's definitely a point of the environment and what they want to do. And they do have a program saying that it's one of the central themes of what they're looking at doing if they are elected. That's my comments.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to point out that Peggy has put into the chat room a link to the Washington Post on a report about the sea level rising with the regular flooding in Miami, which we all know happens. And the Miami people are having to build up to be able to get out of the flooding that happens every day, practically, I guess. All right, I'm gonna unmute Jim Young, and it's not letting me there.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
There he is.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Of course, we have been listening to the warnings for decades now about global warming, and it's been dismissed by a significant percentage of the population who are not taking the issue seriously. And so there are many, literally hundreds, probably I'm underestimating, different proposals, what we could do to mitigate the problem with the atmosphere. I won't even bother to go down the list because they're not happening. That's reality. I'm basically giving you a reality check. Those things are not happening. However, I recall a saying that I read in a book one time by a famous humanist who said, if you want to kill a tree, you're wasting your time beating the branches. You should chop the roots. And that connected with me so much because I see where we have critical situations like we have right now with global warming, and we're beating at these branches. We're trying to get this little thing done and this little thing done, and people are not cooperating. Governments are not cooperating. The wealthiest people in the world who control literally everything are not cooperating because they are greedy and they could care less about the future generations. So the real problem here is, in my opinion, the ability of the planet Earth to sustain a population of 7 billion people. We are already way over the limit. The population on planet Earth is not sustainable at current levels, and we are not taking steps to curb that population growth. It's going to continue. And as long as it continues, we will continue to beat the branches and we will never kill the tree. But I can assure you that Mother Nature has the solution, because if we don't stop our population growth, she is going to stop our population growth. And it will be horrible when it happens. And it will probably be too late. When she gets done killing us off and bringing our populations down to a level that is sustainable, most of humanity will be gone, and we will have lost humanity and be put back into essentially the dark ages. So that's my prognosis. I don't see the people intelligent enough to implement any solution, but I think Mother Nature is going to do it. We're going to have more pandemics. I've been watching more videos on this. This is a direct result of the killing of the environment and human beings encroaching into habitat of wild animals where these pandemics live and are just waiting for us to get there and then infect us. So this one here was been predicted for years, and the scientific community is predicting more. And these microbes and viruses are becoming very resistant to antibiotics. So we're going to see a lot of problems coming down the pike. I don't envy any child growing up in the future. None. There are no future for children on this planet. As far as I'm concerned, it's just going to be a life of hell. I'll be glad when I get the hell out of here so I don't have to see it happen. I'm done.
Thank you, James.
Once again,
Bill Norsworthy.
Jim,
Wait, Vince, we have Bill Norsworthy had his hand up. He's been waiting a while, so we'll get to you after him.
It's always so much fun to follow Jim because his views are, well, apocalyptic is probably a good term for it. About 10 years ago, Jim Peterson and Judy and a number of us spent a lot of time running around, mostly Pinellas County, but the whole Tampa Bay area, talking about the problem, the imminent problem of peak oil. It was the end of the world. We could see it. It was going to happen like in the next month and a half. And we would go out and try to gather people together to share the bad news with them. And it was a very visceral thing. I mean, it looked like that was what was happening. And we were very concerned about it. And we were trying to get the rest of the world to understand our perspective on it. Now, obviously, the end of the world did not happen a month or so after we were doing all that. And things changed. And now you don't hear anything about peak oil. We don't hear anything about the energy crisis. We've got a climate crisis, certainly, but it is not an energy crisis at the moment. Now, it could very easily change on a dime. Something could happen, something that people are expecting will happen could change. But on the other hand, it might just keep rolling along like it is. So when you get to climate change, my concern is, and I think it is shared by almost everybody here, is that it is a very real problem. However, it is not an imminent crisis. It is an abstract idea that we are trying to convince people to agree with us on, an abstract idea that the ocean is going to overwhelm us, the climate is going to become so destructive that we can't even live here, that, as Jim was pointing out, viruses will take over, kill off billions of people, the earth will be a hellish place to live. I mean, those are very apocalyptic terms that most people do not perceive because it is such an abstract idea. I mean, when it gets bad, yeah, they'll be screaming bloody murder and they'll want the heads of any politician who happens to be here in charge at the time. And we'll be able to, or they will be able to look back at this time and say, why didn't they do something when they could? But it's too abstract right now for people to really understand and take action on. And it's going to take a while for all of this to sink in. When the ocean is going up by 2 or 3 inches a decade, it's going to take a few decades. We're probably not going to see it, but it will get increasingly worse as time goes by. I think that's all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you, Bill. Well, I would remind too people that in the 70s, we had the population bomb and everybody was going to die because there wasn't going to be any food. There's always been this kind of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. But you're right. People in Miami see it every day with their flooding. People in Venice see it every day with their flooding. But it is hard for us to see unless you're directly affected. And Neil, I will open it back up to you since I cut you off a while ago.
One of the reasons, Jim, I liked what you were going to present was this carbon program. And you haven't mentioned anything about it. That seems to be a solution that's out there, and countries are acting on it. But I'll go one step further. You know, if this Zoom ends with one idea or that we can take to politicians and say, what are you going to do about it? And they have to either stutter, you know, or come up with an answer. And I think that's what we should do. And I think we also, on newspaper, should print. For example, I'll give you a good example on that one as well. Remember when we built this desalinization plant. You know, Florida has the second largest rainfall in the country. The other state is Louisiana. Why the hell are we building a desalinization plant when we have the second most rainfall in the country, you know? And these are the crazy things that go on. But anyway, I quote myself again saying I'm talking about the problem. We want to talk about solutions. I'm hoping to hear some about this carbon banking, whatever the program is, Jim. Thank you.
So Jim, you want to talk about carbon
Yes, I would. I'd like to talk about all those things. First off, the Tampa Bay Post-Carbon Council is associated with the Post-Carbon Institute in California, and we put our organization together in 2006. And as Bill has pointed out, and while there was initially a lot of concern about peak oil, and there still is, because in point of fact, we were right at the time, in that at that point the consumption of oil and gasoline was such that if it continued longer with the same sort of production and limited to extraction in the conventional way, we would indeed have run out of oil pretty soon. But you may recall that in the interim there was the fracking revolution. So they came up with a new way of extracting oil from the ground, and that enabled the oil companies to have substantially greater reserves than they might otherwise have had, and they still have. However, as it turns out, the fracking itself is really has not turned out to be profitable. They're cutting back on it, and especially now as the world's economic activity has receded considerably, so they no longer produce as much, and which has kind of been a salvation for the oil companies. But at any rate, we grew out of that, and out of the concern for peak oil and into more of a generalized concern with peak everything, that we were extracting too many of the Earth's resources at too rapid a pace, and that we were endangering our own survival by the way in which we were consuming things and turning those oil and petroleum carbon resources into gas, which we pumped up into the upper atmosphere. That's probably not a very good thing, because, as I alluded to in my talk, carbon dioxide is in fact a greenhouse gas, and does make the Earth warmer and produce all the problems that I alluded to. But those are not the only problems. The other problems revolve around things like our consumption of natural resources in total. We are taking minerals and various substances out of the soil or out of the earth and distributing it over a wide range. In other words, going from points of concentration to just disseminating it everywhere, making it very difficult for future generations to have access to many of these things, so that they might have a little bit better life for themselves. So we have numerous problems that we're attempting to deal with, that has to do with, as I say, those natural resources, water. One of the reasons why we have a desalination plant here, Neil, is because here in the Tampa Bay area, at least, there is saltwater intrusion, and it's occurring all over Florida. In fact, along the coastlines, as we take water out of the ground, the sea intrudes into the subsoil layers, and we get salt water into the wells and so forth. So that's why we need a desalination plant, in order to get clean water and make it available for human consumption. And there's all kinds of adjustments and things that we can do to kind of offset some of the problems that we are experiencing. Jim alluded to the population, and indeed that is a problem, the biggest problem that we have. But at the same time, what we're really talking about is not so much the simple population of the planet, but we're talking about a population that wants to live as we do. They want to live at a high level of material consumption. You know, all these books and all the junk I have around here, that's because I'm an American and I have sufficient income to buy all this stuff that you see here. So, and I think many of us are similarly equipped, or perhaps burdened is a better way of putting it. And the other 75% of humankind sees the way we live and wants to live that same way. And the earth simply cannot support it. And so that's what's going to be a major point that will have to be resolved politically and socially and economically.
Jim,
Yes,
let me correct you on, well, not correct you, but let me,
that's all right.
Key West has a water problem, right?
Right.
Key West, okay? They have two desalination plants, but
Right.
they don't use them. So where did they get their water from? Well, they get it in an aqueduct. Duh. Okay? So where is the water coming from? It's coming from the Everglades, where there's plenty of water. And so it's piped out to, but if there's a hurricane and the aqueduct breaks, or the pipe, or some truck hits it or whatever, they'll crank up the tube. So there's the point. We have counties with very low population. They have a lot of water in the ground. We're not moving that water from the people who have it, and we pay them. And then these poor counties, you could say, can afford to send their kids to a better school. We pay them for the water, and the water is pumped to us just like it is out to Key West. That's when I'm talking about solutions. Stop talking about the problem. Talk about real solutions. And who should you talk to? You should talk to your politician first. And my recommendation is the manifesto. You know, you present it to them, and they have to respond. And we'll find some real leadership there. People who deal in not the problem, deal in the solution. Thank you.
Well, I agree with you, Neil, but I also think that we need to, at the same time, get the real leaders of our country, when we're doing things the way we're supposed to do them, is us. I mean, by the people. We are a democracy, after all, and the idea is that we present problems to the people. We propose, or some people at least propose, solutions to those problems, and then the people get to decide on the basis of electing leaders who are intelligent enough to appreciate our situation and what we need to do about it, and hopefully things get done. Now, things can go badly awry, as our current political establishment might suggest. But nevertheless, we have to get people involved. And if they understand, if they agree, and we can, those of us who are activists, who are scientists, who are intellectuals, who are whatever, we can bring attention, public attention to these problems and hopefully make a difference. That's what we're here for.
And speaking of solutions, Karen was talking in the chat about how when she was in Germany, she saw some of the farming, like you gave the example in your presentation. So Karen, can you tell us about that?
It was a project with several universities, and they had shown and built one of these silos, so to speak. It's farming inside big buildings. And my question to them, and we were looking at the examples that they had done out in Asia, and the point behind it, I mean, is not so much for growing salad. What we're talking about is growing main crop products with the goal of making the people sustainable within their own countries. In other words, if in Africa or in Asia, they have to sell part of the food that they should be eating in order to make a profit, to run other things. If they can find more efficient ways of farming that are not directly influenced by weather conditions, in other words, drought or flooding or monsoons or whatever, then they can grow enough food to sustain themselves and also grow food to be able to sell, to receive and buy, or in exchange for other imports and exports, basically. And what they do is they build these sort of high rises, because I was like, well, are you taking an apartment or an office building and just putting in this kind of thing? And they're like, no, it's actually a building. But the examples of the ones they've been doing, they've also been putting like plants on the outside of it. In other words, they're also combining growing essential food through hydroponics combined with making the buildings into environmental silos so that they're bringing air and plants into the cities to help filter the air. And there's a lot of these programs going on right now as research programs with buildings between Asia and European universities, and also projects in Africa to try to reduce poverty and famine, basically, is the goal. While at the same time, if you build up in these silos, you need less areas of land. And they were also basing this on the fact that some of the basic farming that's being done, for example, in Asia, if you look at what happened in Vietnam when they switched from doing rice farming to shrimp and fish and tilapia and things like that, the problem is also if they can, that the soil is done. Once they put the shrimp in and take it out after a certain amount of time, it's rotten. You can't do anything with it. It's not reusable. Whereas if they hydroponic grow certain crops, they're using less area and they're not destroying natural coastline and natural environmental biotopes. So this is really, in my point of view, very progressive. It was very interesting to see this because it combines a bunch of things that we're talking about. The population explosion is a problem because of famine. It's a problem because of poverty. It's not a problem of being too many people in that sense. It's because it's combined in a certain system that we're all involved in, because we cannot look at the environment separate from these issues because they're all joined together, sort of thing. And this is the approach that universities are taking to take climate change, sustainable feeding, economic improvement, and also, sustainable food.
Yeah, I know that in New York, they're doing some top gardening. Community gardens are important, but I do think one of the most important things that we could do is get back buses and can't think of the word right now.
Trains and public transportation.
Public transportation. Thank you. That's what I'm trying.
Transportation. And one of the great things about it, and you see that some of the cities, for example, Naples has senior buses. Mm-hmm. Most people don't have that live in certain communities. If they have a good public transportation system, no 90-year-old wants to get on the road if they don't have to. But the problem is that they can't take their shopping carts into normal buses. So you're multiplying, you're not looking at the problem from a practical point of view. In other words, you're putting in a good thought, let's put in senior public transportation that stops once a block to make it, but if they can't take their shopping cart into it, you're not thinking the whole process through. And I think that one of the important things, and this is where young people need to come in, they need to come into these jobs in cities or planning or economic growth planning by looking at processes, which is what companies have been doing over the years. What's the process? Person A is going, I come from the transportation business, and we look at people, we don't say they enter the airport and they get on a plane, we say they come from home. What are they doing? What have they got? They've got a suitcase. How can they, and you have to look at the train of things. And I think that we need to also, with climate change, look at all the things it affects: population, food, economic, the weather, and everything else. And we're often thinking in too small a category. That's my one point. At the same time, what I wrote before is every little thing makes a difference. Everything, whether it's using a more economic car, whether it's eating less mass-produced meat, whether it's timing the amount of time you spend in the shower and wasting less water, whatever it is you can do, every little thing, and every little thing we teach our children helps too. And I have moved in my elderly parents, man, and I've got them on water saving and solar and the whole thing, you know, and they're 90, but I've got them to understand we're doing this for the future, even if they're not going to be part of it at their age.
Thanks, Karen. Jim Young, you have your hand up.
I just want to comment on this idea that we can appeal to our government and our politicians and ask them to change. The reality, back to reality check, politicians don't give a damn what we want. They are in service to billionaires and corporations. The people be damned. It's been proven over and over and over that you can have 70, 80% of the people in the country that want something, and the people that are running the government won't give it to those people if that 5% who is actually in control of everything, if they don't want it, you're not getting it. And because taking all of these actions that we know need to be taken are going to cut into the profits of these billionaires and corporations, you're not going to see it happen. So I hate to be always the pessimist, but I have absolutely no faith. This election, I have no one to vote for. No one gives a damn that's running for office about the working families struggling under a system of economic slavery. Nobody. Well, yes, there are a few Justice Democrats, and they are getting some elections. But the Democratic Party is basically cutting them out of the conversation. They don't even allow them to have a seat at the table. So I just am not optimistic we're going to see anything that solves this problem except a huge reduction in population, either through nuclear war or a pandemic that we can't cure. That's my reality check. I'm sorry, but that's my point of view.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'd like to go to Ben, Miami. Raising your hand, sometimes I don't always see it, and I apologize, and I appreciate other people telling me that people are working. And then Joe Reinhardt has something to say.
Hi, everybody. I think a very nice group, and I really have a good idea. Let me give mine. I think when you hear noises, you know, one of the qualities of being human is recognition of patterns. There is a global warming going on. Yes, it is. The ice is falling apart and been happening. That's why we have the Great Lakes. It's different epochs, different times. This is acceleration due to civilization that creates heat, and it's creating more heat than ever. Fine, that's not the problem. That's the problem. But what is the solution? My view of it is sometimes you cannot fight something you cannot win. The only way you can win is when you become part of it. And my solution of it, Florida has a big plateau of the sea. We have to change the culture. In other words, the people in the land have to help the people in the sea. In other words, we've been land living for a long time. Maybe it's time to, instead of destroying the sea, destroying everything in this world, and getting the resources on the cheap, we can live with it, more sustainable. And my solution for it is to, instead of like the government, like he said, we are slaves of the state with taxation and this and that and the whole thing, and they create us in order to serve them. At the same time, we serve everybody in a certain way, and we get things on the, in other words, to live with the water that will come in. Maybe we should do islands. Maybe we should close things. But unfortunately, you cannot have the same paradigm, the same way of thinking to solve the same problem. Like Albert Einstein, if you solve the problem with the same consciousness that created it, it's not going to be solved. It has completely a new paradigm of culture, a new culture that will live with the sea, that will be more sustainable. What it will be, I don't know, but it has to be something different than it is today, because we are so dependent on the state to do things, and we don't have the independence to be able to, everything is owned. Everything. I remember Florida, I don't know what governor, I think Chris or one of them, they were going to do gas exploration in the coast of Florida, and they stopped it because it could be an oil spill. A good thing they did, because there was an oil spill in Louisiana, in the Gulf. Maybe we have an oil spill in Florida, it will be destructive in the coast. So it's some limitations. Human beings the technology has some degree of limitations. You can go, how deep you can go to get oil. Yes, you can, but you're going to destroy, eventually it's going to be an accident or something can happen. Up to what degree? So make it short. There's a new paradigm, new solutions but it has to have a new way of thinking. You cannot think the same way. Like the lady in Europe, they're ahead of us in many things. But why? Because they get together, they think a problem, and they find a solution in a collective way. It doesn't mean socialism. It doesn't mean communism. It doesn't mean all these aberrations of human beings that have in order to submit other human beings. Cooperation, that's what we do all the time. Zoom is a corporation. Each one is talking differently here and adding up their information. So it's a corporation. Capitalism is cooperation. You cannot create a car without cooperation. Nobody can, everything is cooperation. So, what is it? Well, how are you going to name it? I don't know. What kind of system, what kind of money, what kind of energy, or how it's going to be worked out? In order for everybody to have their own privacy, their own way, their own life. So the state doesn't have to determine what we're supposed to do or not. But claim the sea. Don't be afraid of the sea. Claim the sea. The sea is ours. But we don't need to destroy it. Okay, thank you.
Ben.
All right.
Very much. Joe Reinhardt, and then Michael. You're muted, Joe. Let's see if I can.
Now it should work.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah.
I thought you had muted me, and so I didn't bother to unmute it. In any case, I've heard several references to the root cause of the problem. I haven't heard much discussion about the real root cause, and that is, of course, overpopulation has been mentioned, but the solutions to that have always been like by way of the four horsemen. No one has really said that vigorous birth control, freedom of choice, condoms, birth control pills, whatever, to women and men in every country or any country that wants them would be a good start. I don't see that happening, of course, but the problem is that changing our culture is not likely to happen either. Change doesn't occur out of need or desire or necessity. It occurs out of nature and out of the unstoppable, because if people or animals could change when they needed to, we'd still have dinosaurs, okay? So I don't see us changing our nature. I do see us going through an apocalypse, which will be very painful and result in a much smaller population, and that Mother Nature will cure these problems. She always does. The earth will go on no matter what we do. It'll be here long after we're gone. And the cliche I always use, and that is, if you think we're going to get together to solve this problem, you need to go to Easter Island and count the trees.
Thank you, Joe. Michael?
Hey guys, I've been listening to you guys a lot, and yeah, I consider myself a cosmic nihilist, but I'm by far not the most nihilistic one here. I actually have a degree of hope for the future. I think the same technologies that brought us into this mess are the same ones that help bring us out. I think there's an obvious solution that we're missing that connects all of them, like population to spread out. There's been lately. Elon Musk has studied up the solid state battery issues, making it more competitive with gas cars. So they have a fair coming out here later this year, and they're implementing it inside the SpaceX rocket, which is able to go back up and down. And then so it seems like we have two problems. We need to reduce the amount of carbon emissions and lower the temperature, right? So some scientists have suggested that you could take Earth railways, electronic railways, and shoot out some of the stuff that we mine from the sea, some of the salts, and make them mirrors to help disperse the heat and stuff that from the focal point of the Earth, from the sun. So it helps disperse a lot of that, which won't solve the problem, but at least buy us some time. While we do that, we also have to change the fact that maybe we can do some lab-grown meat, something that we don't have to, animals don't have to suffer. They don't have to do a lot of cow farts that are, 95% of the methane problem is. You ask a young person, like, oh, I believe in climate control. Like, well, you're not willing to eat that burger? Like, no, I don't care about that much. So, I think it's a priority to eat meat if you want, but I think that we should cause a little bit less suffering and help not harm the planet, because we do. All the farmland is made for these methane gas approaches. But anyways, the solution seems involved reducing the carbon emissions from the bovine creatures and lowering the temperature through mirror with the induction, the mirror technology we're talking about. And that, I think, is probably the last hurdle for us to get to a type 1 civilization. I think this is the last, either we get past this or we die. We don't get past the hurdle. So we're forced to become, a type 1 civilization controlling the planet, the resources of Earth, and ability to just learn and adapt. I'm a huge believer in human adaptability. There's automation. That's the whole reason why I left my warehouse job and studied computer programming, because I saw all the automation coming in. And pretty soon, the amount of work, our idea about work and ethics is going to be switched, because you can't guarantee a livable wage working the same amount of hours nowadays, because all the automation and things are just going to be post-scarcity. So we need to have better ideas what we want, like a universal basic income that helps alleviate some of the edge cases, but leaves people room to pursue their passions. And it is going to require a great shift in consciousness. But I think we're up for the challenge. Either that, if our back is against the wall, we have no choice. We have to either go forward or go extinct.
Thank you, Michael. It's coming close to time to end the discussion. So Jim, I will turn it back over to you if you want to close us out on some positivity, because I know how positive you are.
I'm just gee willikers, by golly, we're gonna lick it. But however, I heard a lot of positive and uplifting sentiment, especially from our last speaker. Thank you, Michael. And I think that we need to look around what's happening right now. It contains some significant indicators. For instance, I rode on an electric bus in Pinellas County. They had a couple of them, and they are installing them now for some of the regular runs over there. And there is room on them for shopping carts, because they recognize the kind of people who ride buses. It's rather important to accommodate them, I think. At any rate, there is that. There's also, if you've been to a Burger King lately, you know that they have now veggie burgers that pass very well for real meat burgers. So there's that, and there's in popular culture, there's a lot of indications that people are aware, to some degree at least, of what's going on. I realize it's still popular on the right to debate a lot of these things and to pretend that they're not true and that they're not happening, for serve the interests of the kind of people that who was it? The capitalist class whose main interest is in exploitation to increase their own wealth. But I think there is some prospect that the people themselves, if they get the chance, if they overcome this backwards initiative, we can make some progress. Let me refer lastly to the chat, and it's way up there now, but there is a link on there to the Tampa Bay Post-Carbon Council webpage. And if you're interested in some very positive things you can actually do, practical things, as well as some theoretical discussions. So take a look at that and see if that might not be helpful to you. Again, we've been around since 2006. We've tried to take on a number of different issues, and so we may have this conversation again because it's such a huge part of human consciousness right now, all over the world, because it affects almost everything. So thank you all for your attention, and I think it's been a really good discussion, and we'll see you next week. Judy?
Thanks everyone for coming. And next week we will have Sarah Henry from the Child Friendly Faith Project, who will be talking with us about how they are trying to steer religion away from child abuse, child neglect, and harmful ways that the ways they treat their children, and ensure that no child suffers because of religious views. So thanks everyone for coming. I've enjoyed it very much, and I hope you have too. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.